Chapter 1, Side Story. Let's call off the engagement. A man and a woman sat across from each other inside the fancy restaurant. There was no one other than them as guests, making it look like a special day for the two of them. But despite the cozy and warm atmosphere, the woman's eyes were cold. Cosette, the man trailed off, trying to process her words. Cosette watched the man sitting across from her coldly, tapping her red nails against her lap lightly. That man was her lover, Ezekiel Stone, the love of her life, the man she had loved dearly with all her heart. I'm calling off the engagement, Zeke, she repeated in the same aloof tone, waiting for the man to raise his head to her. I don't need to explain the reason, right? Those documents are enough to speak its volume. Cosette, love, this are all in the past. Ezekiel, who was stunned to see pictures of his past mistakes shown to him, looked at her in disbelief. Didn't you say you already forgive me for this? Why would you? The corner of her lips curled up into a smirk, chuckling with her lips closed. Ezekiel, did you really think I am the person who gets blinded because of love? You cheated during the first 2 years of our engagement. I didn't care back then for as long as I don't catch you. However, you were caught, my dear love. What? I am the person who never forgives, nor do I give second chances, Zeke. She snickered, amused by the sight of the man who broke her heart into smithereens. Did you really think all these years I truly changed into that lovely, kind, and dependent lady who wants to be saved by the hero all this time? She laughed. My gosh, Ezekiel, you're really a loser, aren't you? You can't love me for who I am, but you opened up your heart when I was someone who will not steal away your light. She continued to ridicule him, laughing evilly whilst shaking her head sideways. You don't deserve me, Ezekiel. Cosette scoffed as her eyes narrowed slightly with the same smirk on her face. Cosette and Ezekiel were arranged in a marriage of convenience. She was smart, stunning, elegant, the epitome of a socialite. Meanwhile, Ezekiel was known to be gentle and brilliant, and good-looking among his peers. The two of them were aware that they didn't bear romantic feelings for each other in the beginning. However, since the elders of their family had already decided, Cosette and Ezekiel tried to get to know each other for the sake of having a peaceful marriage. Their elders said that love could be nurtured if both of them tried. It was true, or at least that was Cosette's thought. Her fiancé was considerate, gentle, kind, and charming, so it was inevitable that a woman like her would open her heart to the man she was supposed to marry. However, in the second year of their long engagement, Cosette faced a horrible truth about Ezekiel. She caught the man, whom she welcomed in her heart, embracing another woman and kissing her passionately. Although she had heard gossip of Ezekiel's love affairs behind her back, she didn't listen to them. Not that she didn't believe or believed them. In her mind, as long as she didn't see it with her own two eyes, she would take the gossip as irrelevant noises undeserving of her attention. Maybe the gods love or hate her because she caught Ezekiel in the act. But instead of throwing a huge fit or confronting her fiancé, Cosette went back home and cried herself to sleep. That same night, she plotted her revenge on this man, to make him feel the same pain she had gone through. Cosette didn't think of ruining the Stone family or fooling around with another man. Her means of revenge were different. That was, to love Ezekiel with everything she could until he would love her to the point he would die without her. And then leave him. Now, after her 2 years of hard work, she finally got that sweet revenge she wanted. Do you want me to break the news to your family, or will you do it yourself? She asked as Ezekiel hung his head low, rendered speechless by the coldness of the woman he loved. Let me know about your decision. I will break the news to my father. Don't worry, I will not bring up the real reason for this breakup. I'll tell him it is a mutual agreement, since my family will be very disappointed if they knew the perfect Ezekiel is not so perfect after all. Cosette took a deep breath as she assisted herself up. Before she went away, she took out cash to pay for their dinner. Let's stay in contact, Ezekiel. I still want to be friends. As if to spite him, she offered and smirked before walking away, not looking back at him even once. When Cosette reached her car, she gripped the steering wheel as hard as she could while panting. That was the revenge she had wanted all along, and yet, although it was sweet, it left a bitter taste in her mouth. She couldn't understand the pain swelling in her chest. All this time, while playing the role of a damsel in distress, a role that was the opposite of her personality, she had been thinking of leaving him. He deserves it, she muttered through her gritted teeth, gripping the steering wheel even tighter. He deserves it. As she chanted those words like a spell, the last 2 years with Ezekiel flashed back before her eyes. Like a fragile glass, everything, their smiles, the warm moments, the sweet nothings, everything shattered. He deserves, her breath hitched as tears rolled down her cheeks, pounding her fist against her chest. It hurts. Her heart was in pain. This wasn't what she expected she would feel after leaving him. Only then did Cosette realize that her revenge was just another means of hurting herself. She loved Ezekiel, no matter how detestable he was, and despite the fact that he only loved the weak version of herself. Her heart wanted him, but she also knew that he would only love her if she wasn't being herself. And that she couldn't do, sacrifice herself just so she could meet his standard of love. That night, Cosette drove herself home while carrying the remains of her dead heart. And that was how Cosette ended, and the start of a cold-hearted villainess. Hick, a lady covered her mouth with her palm, muffling her cries as she read a side story of her second favorite character that was only released a year later after the novel, The Devil's Den, ended. Big Sister Cosette came out a muffled voice, reading the last sentence of the page about Cosette Blac, who also had the same name as her. Why did you like that kind of man? You're pretty intelligent and rich. He really doesn't deserve you. In the main story of The Devil's Den, Cosette was vicious and selfish. But what she liked about her character was, Cosette was unlike any other villainess who would lose their minds in the name of love and disregard their self-worth. Cosette, the villainess of the story, the only reason she interfered with the female lead and male lead's love story was that it was fun. She didn't love the male lead. Well, she was interested in him in a way, but her feelings weren't that deep that could be called love. All her actions throughout the novel made things interesting, and somehow, it made the female lead and male lead closer. Even one reader pointed out whether Cosette was even trying to break them apart or make them closer. Either way, although Cosette was a villainess, a lot of loyal readers of the novel liked her. They even wished for her own happy ending. But alas, the side story about her was her past for readers to get a better understanding of her character. Gosh, I hate the author, the sickly woman clicked her tongue in irritation. Did she hate me that much? Why did she have to kill multiple characters, give the main villain a redemption arc only to kill him, and then this? Is she a sadist? Does she have a cup of tea with Satan every time she makes her readers cry? A long list of complaints directed to the author of the novel came out of the woman's mouth. She loved the author, but at the same time, hated her. Although the author made logical judgments in the course of the characters' lives and endings, she couldn't deny this conflict in her heart. If only this story is real and I live in the book. She finally stopped complaining, staring at the white ceiling of the hospital room, where she had spent the remainder of her days. I want to change the course of their lives. If only I can, I will make this story a bit lighter with fewer deaths and agony. The patient, who had already lost all her hair and barely had color on her dry lips, smiled bitterly. Her eyes felt heavy as she blinked weakly, feeling her breathing constrict. Since she had been sick for years, she was already used to this kind of difficulty she was experiencing. Sister Cosette. Little did she know, when she closed her eyes and succumbed to the darkness, her heart stopped and her breathing was gone. Chapter 2: Waking Up as the Villainess. Cosette weakly opened her eyes, shielding her eyes at the warm sunlight hitting her face. A moan slipped past her lips, letting her mind buffer for another day she was thankful to have. When she had enough blinks, her brows furrowed at the unfamiliarity of the window. She looked around, only to get more baffled at the entire princess-like room. Her mind momentarily went blank as she tried to recall what happened before she slept. Nothing. After reading the long-awaited side stories of The Devil's Den, she fell asleep because of too much crying. Wait, she thought, pushing herself to sit up, scratching her temple to think. The last memory she had was cursing the author of her favorite novel for making her cry. She couldn't remember she had a change of room. She looked around once again and was baffled at everything. There was no medical equipment or anything of the sort to keep her company. Instead, this room looked like a rich daughter's room. Am I dreaming? She wondered, pinching her cheek just to wince in pain. What the? Noticing her hand, her eyes dilated at her blemish-free hand and her healthy skin. But what shocked her the most was that her hands were small and delicate. There was no sign of protruding vein, nor there was a trace of IV on the back of her hand. It was as if she wasn't sick at all. The young lady with natural hazel hair and a pair of olive eyes stretched her arms. Her body felt light, a feeling almost unrecognizable to her, who spent the last 5 years of her life suffering from leukemia. As she moved, she finally noticed the color of her tousled hair. She gazed down, lifting the sheet away to see that she had no difficulty in moving her legs. Am I really dreaming, or is this heaven? She wondered before she chuckled to get that silly thought out of her mind, but just a second later her expression died down. No, did I really die, and is this really heaven? A sudden sense of dread finally crept up her spine, wide-eyed. On instinct, her eyes landed on the vanity mirror, and without a second hesitation, she jumped out of the queen-sized bed towards it. No way, standing in front of the vanity mirror, she touched her face while staring ghastly at the person looking back at her. Hazel hair that matched the color of her olive eyes, skin that was white and pinkish, narrow nose, plump lips, and a lean face. A peerless beauty that was almost out of this world. Although she appeared to be around 16, her beauty was something that would catch everyone's attention. Who? Cosette trailed off as these facial features reminded her of someone she read in her favorite novel. Although she pictured the character, Cosette Blac, differently, staring at this young lady exceeded the face she had of the woman in question. Wait, is this really real? She wondered, pinching herself again until her cheeks grew red. It hurts. She rubbed her cheek, taking a careful step forward to study her face. Myriads of questions hovered over her head, such as she was already in heaven, or was this the afterlife? Even transmigration crossed her mind, no matter how silly the idea was for her. But one question stood out in her head. What happened to me? She asked curiously, flinching when she heard a knock from the door. Miss, are you awake now? A woman's soft voice came from outside the door, but she didn't open it. Miss, Cosette tilted her head to the side, staring at the door vigilantly. What is going on here? After her puzzlement at these phenomena, nervousness soon came right after. She had no idea who she was, what was going on, and everything. Gosh, she ground her teeth, gazing at the shut door when the woman knocked once again. Calm down, act normal. She patted her chest lightly, sitting down on the chair in front of the vanity mirror. After taking deep breaths, she looked at herself in the mirror with determination. She had no idea what was her name, but panicking wouldn't resolve that for her. You can do this, she cheered herself, thinking that this could also be a dream she would wake up from. A strange dream that felt so vivid, but that's where the fun was. At least, even in a dream, she could live a life that was the complete opposite of her reality. Young miss. I'm awake, Cosette finally answered, as she grabbed the comb to brush her soft hair. Come in. The door carefully opened, surprised to see a woman in her 40s in a maid uniform. Did I become a rich lady? She wondered in horror but managed to keep her calm exterior. She studied the maid through the mirror in silence, watching her stand from a distance while bowing her head. Young miss, the old nanny slightly raised her head and smiled apologetically. Are you still angry at the master? He is waiting for you to join him for breakfast. What? I don't even know who I am, so how would I get angry? Oh gosh, just what the hell is going on? Was what Cosette wanted to say, but cleared her throat and said nothing. The less I talk, the less mistake I will make. Young miss. Do you know who I am? She asked in a cold tone, turning her head back to the maid. Although she only put on the bare minimum of acting, she still looked intimidating with her unsmiling face. Cosette had this sudden thought in mind. If this maid showed so much concern about whatever dispute the owner of this body had, that means her personality wasn't that simple. So this question might rather appear intimidating. The maid revealed a pained expression as she hung her head low. You are the only child and the sole heiress of the Blac family, Cosette Blac, young miss. So I see you know your place. Cosette trailed off as her eyes dilated extra wide, almost popping out of their sockets. Wait, what? Cosette who? Chapter 3. If she could live as the villainess for a day. Wait, what? Cosette who? The maid raised her brows at the misplaced puzzlement of the young miss of the clan. There was a moment of silence between them before the maid called her name, with a questioning tone. Only then did Cosette snap back to the current lapse. Leave me alone, Cosette ordered in a dead tone, looking away. But young miss. Leave. The maid let out a shallow breath, as her young miss personality was getting cold every passing day. But she couldn't do anything about it, as the last argument between Cosette and her father truly upset her. Then I will tell the master you will have breakfast in your room, said the maid with a bow, leaving her alone without saying another word. When Cosette was left alone, her jaw fell open as she stared at the mirror in horror. She couldn't believe what the maid called her. Although her original name was Cosette, her surname was different. That name, Cosette Blac, was the name of one of her favorite characters in the novel The Devil's Den. It can't be right. She slapped herself to wake herself up from this dream, only to get disappointed and hurt. Her cheek had already turned red, but she wouldn't wake up to reality. If anything, her face heated up at the constant slapping she did, and it also hurt. She couldn't possibly transmigrate inside the book, right? No way, came out a whispered, feeling this sense of dread slowly envelop her heart. That this only happens in novels. She sat there for as long as she could remember, staring at herself in the mirror. When she finally got herself together, she rushed to her desk where her pink laptop was at. "Come on," she muttered, tapping her fingers against the desk impatiently. Once the screen turned on, her eyes instantly landed on the date. To her surprise, the date was different. Cosette had followed The Devil's Den for 3 years, rereading it when she was bored with waiting for updates. So she basically knew the world of the novel, the characters, the sequence of events, some powerful dialogue, and description like it was written at the back of her hand. Although its setting was the modern world, the city, and the country, everything was different. It was a unique world heavily influenced by the modern world, but with many twists and turns. That was why she loved the novel in the first place. Did I really become Sister Cosette, my goddess? She covered her gaping mouth with her palm, still denying this unbelievable reality. No, maybe it's because of the medicines I'm having these strange dreams. Cosette convinced herself that she was still inside the dream. A dream she could experience and could treasure before entering the pearly gates of heaven. Deluded by the series of denials, Cosette tried to sneak a peek at Cosette Blac's laptop. Based on the date, it was a decade early before the main story would start. In that case, Cosette was still in her early teens. Her face brightened up as she cupped her cheek, smiling from ear to ear. As she couldn't believe she would be able to see her favorite character in her teens. In the story, Cosette was a sophisticated elite who can make a dollar ring make it look like it was a national treasure. The author used all kinds of praises whenever she described her, the villainess, and it only made it better with her personality. Cosette never lost her composure, even when the male laid refused her when she seduced him one time. If anything, Cosette laughed after getting rejected, as if she was amused. She was the perfect villainess, but somehow, no one shipped her with the villain. Actually, no one wanted to ship her with anyone, because her personality was so strong it seemed no one deserved her. "I don't want to wake up from this dream," she muttered while leaning back. All she saw in Cosette's laptop were presentations and things that a normal 16-year-old wouldn't do. Well, it was mentioned in the story that since Cosette was the heiress of the BLK group, she pressured herself to deserve the title she was born to. The sad part was, Cosette was so strict with herself that her relationship with her father only grew apart over the years. She thought her father wanted her to be the perfect leader of the company, so she played the role perfectly. Only on her father's deathbed did she finally know that her father loved her dearly and wished for her happiness. That, what mattered to her father, was her own happiness before the company, but it was already too late. They all had sad stories. She frowned, thinking that the characters in this novel were pitiful. If I'm going to live as Sister Cosette for a day, will she be happy if I fix her relationship with her father? She pondered about what to do since she wouldn't wake up to reality, until a knock from outside caressed her ears once again. It was the maid that came to her, telling her she prepared her breakfast. "Come in," she permitted calmly, watching the maid push the food trolley. "I'll eat on my desk. I need to finish some things in school." "Yes, young miss." The maid carefully served the light breakfast on the wide desk while Cosette watched her in silence. She sounded so harsh on this old maid earlier, and she felt a little guilty about it. But that was because she was so shocked and confused at the same time. "Don't go," Cosette uttered after the maid served the glass of water. "I want to ask you something." "Yes, young miss." Cosette turned her swivel chair and sized up the maid. In the story, Cosette had this nanny who stood up like her mother and someone who treated her as her daughter. That maid helped Cosette emotionally and had stood beside her even when the entire world was against the villainess. If her guess was correct, this was that nanny. "Nanny Lucia," she called in a quiet voice, studying the nanny's reaction. "Yes, young miss." Cosette heaved a sigh of relief when Lucia replied with brows raised. "About father. I already told the master that you want to eat inside your room, young miss." "No, I mean, do you know why I am upset with my father?" She shook her head lightly, carefully picking up the right words so she wouldn't sound suspicious. Lucia hung her head low. "It's because the young miss wanted to start her training in the company, but the master is against it." "And why is he against it?" "Young miss, please believe me if I say the master only wants you to enjoy your youth, and it's not because he thinks you're incapable of taking on big responsibilities," Lucia exclaimed as she desperately looked at Cosette, hoping the stubborn young miss would listen to her for once. "Of course, I believe you." Sister Cosette's lifetime goal was to make her father proud and ease his worry about the company. So it is no surprise that she already wants to be more involved in the company at a young age, Cosette uttered inwardly, letting out a sigh. Cosette was already matured since childhood, but only when she was around 10 did she start talking to her father as if they were simply business partners. She already knew the reason, and that was, the young Cosette wanted to prove to everyone she didn't need to be a boy to ease their worry on who would lead the BLK group. "Is that so?" she crooned, rocking her head lightly. "Young miss." The side of her lips curled up into a smile as she glanced at Lucia. "Nanny, please inform the master if he is free during dinner. I would like to join him." Chapter 4. Not anyone's first choice. There was bafflement and surprise in Lucia's face when Cosette uttered such words, but she was still relieved that the latter seemed ready to reach out to her father. After all, their relationship was just growing further by the years that Cosette even addressed her father as master or chairman. After Cosette finished the delicious meal she had never had before, she had nothing else to do but stay inside her room. Lucia told her that Cosette took a week's leave from her school. Since this was a world inside the novel, she didn't question it. "Sister Cosette's life is very different from mine. Although we share the same name, we really live different lives. That's why I felt empowered whenever she appears in the novel." Cosette laid on her back, staring at the intricate ceiling while thinking about the novel. "I never had such delicious food, or rather, everything I ate for the last 5 years is just bland. Not that she also had the appetite to eat, but it still felt nice that she had got to enjoy food after many years. Once I wake up from this dream, I will surely reread the novel." She smiled subtly, feeling blessed at this opportunity granted to her. Her smile didn't last long, though, because while she was thinking about this opportunity, she thought that once she woke up, there was no telling she would dream about this again. Cosette suddenly got up wide-eyed. "I have to meet the other character while I'm at it," came out a panicking voice. Although it was a decade too early before the main story would start, the backstories in the novel gave away almost everything. For example, around this year, the villain was still a high school delinquent, the male lead living a perfect life of an heir in an academy, the female lead living a peaceful and simple life in the countryside, some important side characters living their life before meeting their respective masters. "That right?" Cosette raised her fist, motivated to meet as many characters as she could so she could fangirl over them. She had already seen Cosette, and it was already a dream come true, but she was greedy and wanted to meet all of them before this dream ended. "I don't have anything to do and it's still early." Her lips stretched from ear to ear until her eyes squinted. "Kaya Tilda, I'm so excited." Without a second hesitation, Cosette rushed to the large bathroom and showered, going through Cosette's walk-in closet and picking up the simplest designer clothes right after. In between her activity, she couldn't help but be in awe that Cosette's life was truly a life of a modern princess. From the bedroom to the bathroom, even her toilet didn't have a speck of dust in it. Her walk-in closet was only full of designer clothes, bags, accessories, and different types of footwear. For a 16-year-old to have such a lifestyle, there was no wonder why many women envied Cosette, even the female lead voiced that out during her confrontation with the villainess. Cosette truly had it all, except that she had every material thing in life, except love. No material thing could have fulfilled that void Ezekiel stone left in her heart. "Shala Tilda," she grinned excitedly, staring at herself in the full-body mirror. The simplest clothes she could get from this room was a black jumper dress worn over a beige sweater, matched with black Chelsea boots. Cosette thought that the black beret hat looked cute, so she put it on as the cherry on top of her outfit. Surely, even without trying, Cosette would look good at everything. "Sister Cosette is so pretty." She blushed, cupping her cheek. If she could worship herself, she would have done it. No, I should focus. Since Sister Cosette's father gives his daughter a lot of authority in the house, I can ask someone to drive me to my today's agenda. She nodded with her fist up, thinking of her itinerary for today. To keep herself composed, Cosette just grabbed a small black sling bag and rushed back to her room. She sat down in front of the desk, taking one notebook and pen, and started jotting down the details of each character's location. Right, the male lead is actually Sister Cosie's schoolmate. Since the academy was big, they didn't get to meet each other even after graduation. I can't blame them, though, since the male lead, Asher Quinn, and Sister Cosie are too busy trying to be perfect. Cosette nodded, as that was the explanation given in the novel. Not that these two characters didn't know each other's existence, but it just didn't matter to them back then. Only a few years later would they truly get to know each other, since both of them were successful CEOs who inherited their family business. "I'll start with him since he's the closest," and then, her eyes lit up at the thought of her next target. "My #1 favorite character, Maxen. Kaya Tilda, should I look for him first?" For a good 5 minutes, Cosette spent it fangirling on who to pay a visit first. In the end, she chose the villain of the story, Maxen. Why? Because the villain was never anyone's first option. The male lady had it all, and even if she see him now, she was certain all she could do was watch him from afar. On the other hand, Maxen was on his road to becoming the monster he would be after a decade. Although in the novel it was said that Maxen, during his teens, was a delinquent with a temper, Cosette was unsure if he would even bat an eye at her. Even so, she still wanted to see him first. Because at the end of the day, among all characters in this world, Maxen was the first person she wanted to console, because he deserved a little bit of warmth the author deprived him of. Chapter 5: Meeting the Villain. Cosette didn't even have a hard time going out of the enormous mansion of the Blac residence. She only told the butler she needed someone to drive him to a place, no excuses needed or anything of the sort, and a black sedan was already waiting for her outside. Thanks to her excellent memory, she knew the school Maxen attended. It was a school of delinquents, situated in a town far away from the capital. I looked it up on the internet and classes are still ongoing. I am only allowed to take a leave because Sister Cozy came from a prominent family, and the school she attends is, well, a school for the rich. In other words, the academy understands the situation of the heiress and heirs of each family, so they allow such a rule. She nodded while rubbing her chin at the thought. I feel nervous, though. A deep sigh slipped past her lips as she looked outside the window on the back passenger seat. From the novel's brief explanation, Maxen was a delinquent who used to skip classes but still passed the class barely. But his poor grades were intentional since he didn't find the need to do better in school or top the class since his view of this world was nothing but grey, dull. If this dream started early, I could have saved Maxen from his horrible childhood. Her frown deepened, eyes flickering with sadness. Maxen had a horrible childhood. Her mother died when he was around 2 years old and he was left in his uncle's care, his mother's biological brother. There, Maxen went through horrible things where he was physically, emotionally, and verbally abused. That was why when he reached the age of 14, he ran away from home. He did multiple jobs to survive and not end up begging for food in the streets. Now, 3 years later, Maxen had his own small apartment, still doing part-time at night and attending school by the day. That was what was written in the novel, she whispered inwardly, wondering what Maxen would appear now. She was truly looking forward to it, but there was this lingering fear in her heart. Knowing someone's entire life, secret and future was something that left a bitter taste in her mouth. She might end up bawling her eyes the second she meets Maxen. Young miss, we're here. Cosette snapped her eyes as her thoughts trailed off, checking the street where the car stopped. The street looked unfamiliar, but she could just ask around. Thank you, she smiled as she opened the door. As soon as she went out, she bent her head down and spoke. Please don't wait for me, I will take the bus later. She didn't wait for the driver to respond as she slammed the door closed. What she didn't notice was, the driver, who had been driving her for years, was rattled by her appreciation. There wasn't a single time where Cosette spoke to him, nor did she ever thank him for driving her anywhere. Young miss, the old driver gazed at Cosette's figure as she already walked down the pavement. Is she all right? There it is. Cosette's eyes brightened up as she stood in front of the gates of Winter High School. The gates were closed, meaning the classes were ongoing. Did I come too early? She cocked her head to the side, rubbing her chin as she paced back and forth. Well, I did, since it's 15 minutes before lunch break. A frown instantly dominated her face as she gazed at the school gates once again. She wanted to meet Maxen immediately, but she failed to consider that she was an outsider. Even when this school was one of the worst high schools which produces many bad adults, there were still rules to follow. Ah, just then, Cosette remembered something during the redemption arc of the novel, the back of the school. Her eyes lit up as she hastened her steps to find that area. In the novel, Maxen usually skipped schools, and his primary route was jumping off the wall on the back of the school, where there were no guards. I'm not even sure if he came to school, she mumbled, thinking that going in here was actually a gamble. It is written that during the last 2 years of his high school, the days he was absent increased and he would get in more trouble. Right, I think it was said that during his last 2 years in high school, Maxen. Suddenly, Cosette stopped as her complexion turned pale. She was so lost in thought because the moment she made a turn around the school, what welcomed her eyes was a group of youngsters ganging up against one. Her eyes fell on the boys, who were kicking a chubby boy simultaneously while laughing. The poor boy could only receive their kicks, protecting his head while lying on the ground. In the last 2 years of Maxen's high school life, the reason he couldn't attend school is that he would get beaten to the point he would pass out. Cosette's heart thumped against her chest loudly, balling her hands into a fist until they trembled. Although she was unsure if the person getting beaten up was Maxen, she could feel this anger swelling up in her heart. Hey, she yelled her lungs out, catching the delinquents' attention as they stopped. All reasons were tossed out of the window as she rushed towards them, holding her luxury bag and swinging it to scare them away. What the? Surprised at this courageous girl, the delinquents backed away until she stood in a protective stance in front of the boy on the ground. What the hell? Who is this? Before one delinquent could finish his sentence, she raised her phone to show the ongoing phone call to the police hotline. Seeing that they understood what that meant, she placed the phone in front of her phone. Father, help, there are gangsters trying to take advantage of me. I'm at Winter High. Cosette kept yelling and watched the delinquents run away, thinking she was the daughter of the police. How they believed that blatant lie was not of her concern, maybe because they were too shocked at her sudden appearance and caught up in confusion, but she didn't care. Oh gosh, Cosette covered her lips with her palm, seeing the pitiful state of the boy. His uniform was dirty, and his arms were littered with bruises. Her breath hitched as soon as her eyes caught the traces of blood on the concrete ground. My God, her body uncontrollably shook, having this dreadful feeling of reality. It felt real, everything felt and seemed real. How could a dream feel so vivid, as if it wasn't just a simple dream? Suddenly, Cosette caught an ID not far away from him. She was too scared to check the boy's face after seeing his mangled lips, but it seemed he had passed out. So she picked up the school ID only to freeze upon reading the name printed on it. Maxen Devilsin. Chapter 6. Reading and seeing things was like heaven and earth. Cosette wiped her tears with her arm before she gazed at the teenage boy lying on the hospital bed. There was no doubt this was Maxen. Although he had some weight, unlike the bewitching devil he was described in the novel, and the author's meaning of delinquent was being bullied, her heart knew it was Maxen, the villain of the novel. After she scared off those delinquents who beat Maxen up, she called the driver to pick her up, and they drove to the nearest hospital. 3 hours later, Maxen was still unconscious, and she was just sitting right next to his bed. While waiting for him to regain consciousness, Cosette couldn't help but shed tears. Even she was surprised at how real these tears felt to the touch. How can they do such a cruel thing to him? She wondered, gazing at the poor Maxen. No wonder he became a villain. Reading Maxen's story was different from witnessing it with her own 2 eyes. It felt like an invisible hand was squeezing her heart. She already pitied Maxen during the redemption arc, but now her heart was breaking for him. His experience, written with just a few sentences, was not enough to give justice to Maxen's pain, suffering, and trauma. Actually, words weren't enough to give justice to everything this person went through. Although Maxen did despicable deeds in the novel to the point his death was justified, Cosette felt a tug in her heart. Maxen, she called internally, staring at him with soft eyes. I'm sorry. Cosette didn't know why she had to apologize to him, but that was what she felt. All his life, the world just gave him nothing but hardships and endless struggle. Now, she had a better understanding of why Maxen grew obsessed with the female lead. The female lead was a warm and lovely character. She was like the first morning of spring, melting the vestiges of winter. Although the start of the story between the female lead and Maxen started off rocky and super dark, the latter ended up falling in love with her. Sadly, Maxen wasn't the male lead, and what he did to the female lead at the start of the novel was unforgivable. He was despicable, to say the least, but he hadn't done that in the current timeline. I want to stay longer, Cosette prayed sincerely, knowing she might be asking for too much. I want to change Maxen's fate. He doesn't deserve this. For her, if Maxen had someone while growing up, just one person to guide him to the right path, he wouldn't do those despicable deeds in the novel. Maybe, she thought, if there was one good thing that happened to him, he wouldn't end up being the villain he was supposed to be. Oh. Cosette perked up, planting her palm on his side as she watched him regain his consciousness whilst grunting. Maxen weakly opened his eyes, seeing a pair of puffy olive eyes hovering over him. Who? He trailed off and winced at the striking pain in his head. Are you hurt anywhere? She asked worriedly while she scanned him in panic. Where are you hurt? Confused at the unfamiliar concern he was receiving, Maxen blinked until his vision was clear. To his surprise, a young lady was staring down at him with eyes full of genuine concern. They were swollen, as if she had just stopped crying. Wait, came out a hoarse voice as propped his elbow to sit up. He winced at the pain in his rib, touching it on instinct. You shouldn't move just yet, she bellowed, sitting on the edge of the bed with her eyes fixed on him. You're still hurt terribly. Can you keep it down? Annoyed, Maxen glared at her, whom he has never seen in his entire life. You're so fucking loud you're making my head ring. Cosette instantly zipped her mouth, puffing her cheek as she gazed at him in horror. Her obedience made him quirk a brow, but he said nothing as he looked around. Damn, he cursed under his breath, flinging his legs carefully out of the bed to leave. However, Cosette grabbed his wrist, making him look back at her. Where are you going? She stammered while Maxen clicked his tongue in irritation. Bathroom. I don't have money to pay for the hospital bill. So what, is that more important than your life? Maxen ground his teeth, pulling his wrist away from her grip, but Cosette held onto him as if he was her dear life. Let go, he cautioned coldly, but she was much more stubborn than what he originally thought. No. I said let ack. Before he could use more force to free his hand, Cosette poked the side of his abdomen. It was just a light press, but the pain was too much that Maxen hunched in, falling ever so slowly back on the bed. Cosette jumped out of the bed and huffed, hands on her hips. You're not leaving this place until you've recovered. Don't worry about the hospital bill. My family is rich, they can buy this entire hospital, so just get better. Her expression crumpled, but managed to sport a brave look. Maxen furrowed his brows as he peeked at the stubborn young lady who was too persistent in making him stay. It was not like money was the only issue here. Aside from that, he didn't want to owe anyone. Who knew what she would ask in return after helping him? I know you're the type of person who hates being indebted to someone, but you don't have to worry about that. I promise you I don't have other motives, nor I will expect anything from you in return. Cosette let out a sigh as she suppressed the tears that were tempting to escape her eyes. Just get better, that's all I ask of you. Maxen looked at her with hostility, and after a minute of staring at her doe eyes, a deep sigh slipped past his lips. She wouldn't let him off, and he was sure of that. Arguing with her was pointless. Even if you ask for anything, I don't have the conscience, or will I ever feel I will have to repay you for this, he grumbled, but to his surprise, Cosette's eyes brightened up as she leaped and bent over. Yes, don't worry, just focus on getting better. She grinned until her eyes were squinting and lips stretching from ear to ear. Chapter 7, The Faint Warmth After a Long Winter. When Maxen finally listened to her and lay down properly, they didn't talk to each other. Cosette kept her mouth shut while staring at him to let him rest. Meanwhile, the former tried to avoid her presence as much as possible, but how could he? She was literally digging a hole in his forehead with her gaze. Stop staring, he muttered, breaking the silence between them. Just what do you want from me? Maxen set his eyes to her when he couldn't take the undivided attention anymore. Cosette raised her brows, sitting on the chair right next to his bed with her hands on her lap. I want you to get better, she replied while cocking her head to the side. I mean, why? Because why not? Never mind. Maxen looked away and shut his eyes. Before he passed out earlier, he heard a girl's voice. He wasn't slow to recognize that the person who helped him earlier and this girl sitting near him were the same. Maxen would understand being in a hospital after getting beaten up pretty badly, and he would understand if this girl sent him to the hospital as that was logical, but what he couldn't understand was her concern, as if she knew him. This was their first time they met, so this concern she was showing him came off as suspicious. Although it doesn't seem she was lying, he thought, recalling her sincere eyes that were about to shed tears while saying he should get better. Those fuckers, I will get back to them once I get out of here. His head throbbed as his body felt heavy with fatigue. It didn't take long when Maxen fell asleep once again. Meanwhile, Cosette stayed silent and just stared at him. A sigh of relief slipped past her lips when his breathing grew deeper and heavy. Just for tonight, I want to stay with Maxen before I wake up to my reality, she told herself, smiling bitterly as she believed this dream would soon end. I still have to tell the chairman, though. Cosette took out her phone from her bag and sent a message to her father, telling him she would unwind. Since her father favored her, she knew he would understand his daughter. Just then, Cosette recalled she told Lucia to tell her father she would join him for dinner. So, out of courtesy, she sent another message. To Chairman. Sorry, Papa, I will surely join you tomorrow for dinner. 3. Cosette hesitated to send that cheesy message, but she still did after beating herself with it. She initially wanted to fix Cosette's relationship with her father, but with her limited time in this world, she wanted to be with Maxen. He may not remember it, and this may not be real, but, even in dreams, I want to make him feel someone cared for him. In the middle of the night, Maxen woke up. His initial reaction was to massage his temple at the lingering headache he was feeling. The light in the ward was warm, so it helped him ease his headache. Right, she probably left. His thoughts trailed off when he turned his head to where Cosette sat earlier. There on the same spot, Cosette had fallen asleep. She was still sitting on the chair, but her head was resting over her arm that was on the edge of the bed. "To think she stayed," he whispered, scratching his temple. "Even the people I knew wouldn't stay in the hospital for me." A ridiculing chuckle slipped past his lips while shaking his head lightly. This was the first, but from his experience so far, Maxen wouldn't buy such an act of kindness easily. He had learned his lessons, and falling for such a cheap trick would never happen again. So even though he was slightly thankful and commended her efforts, he still planned to sneak out of the hospital. Right now was a perfect time while she was asleep, but as he moved, he realized Cosette was holding his hand. "What the—" "Don't go," she whispered in her sleep, squeezing his hand lightly. "Please get better." The rest of her mumblings came out as gibberish, but Maxen was already unable to move. He looked at her, wide-eyed. She was sound asleep and still mumbling, but the way she held him was as if she was afraid of letting him go. He clicked his tongue in irritation as he gazed at the ceiling. Maxen remained silent for as long as he was conscious that night, but he didn't take his hand away from her, who was holding him with such gentleness and care, not minding the calluses on his hand. "What a strange person," he mumbled after 2 hours of silence, closing his eyes as he fell asleep once again. That night, for the first time in the 17 years of his life, strangely, the faint warmth wrapped around his hand was enough to fight off the endless winter he had endured for a long time. Chapter 8: Are You a Psychopath? The familiar discomfort and slight pain that woke Cosette up made her believe she was back to reality. Although it wasn't the same level of pain she had been enduring, her strange yet beautiful dream was over. "How sad," she thought, letting out a sigh as she blinked weakly. "Maxen, my dream feels real." Cosette blinked countless times, seeing the familiar ward she was staring at before she fell asleep. Her mind buffered for a while as she tried to match this ward, and to the ward she had stayed at in the real world. "What?" Her voice trailed off, wide-eyed, as she suddenly recoiled to sit up. Maxen, who was leaning against the headboard, also flinched as she suddenly sat upright the second she woke up. He furrowed his brows as he studied the shocked Cosette in silence. She looked possessed as her dilated eyes barely blinked, making him scrunch his nose up. What's wrong with her? Didn't she intend to sleep here? He wondered, as that was the only explanation for her shock. She must have fallen asleep unintentionally, although he was surprised that she slept soundlessly despite her uncomfortable position. "I'm still here," she muttered in a dead tone, shifting her eyes at Maxen and gasped. "How?" Maxen clicked his tongue, watching her dramatically cover her mouth with her palm. "You had fallen asleep, that's why you're still here," he explained, which was very unlike him. Little did he know that wasn't what she meant. Cosette blinked her eyes as hard as she could, pinching her cheeks to wake herself up, but she only winced in pain and made Maxen look at her as if she was a lunatic. "I'm still," she trailed off as she set her eyes on Maxen. The latter slightly raised his hand defensively on instinct, drawing back as soon as their eyes met. Why are you looking at me like that?" he asked cautiously. "Can I?" "What do you think you're doing?" he queried once again when Cosette lifted a finger to touch him. It reminded him of how she poked his injury, so he assumed that was what she was planning to do. Cosette bit her lower lip, keeping her finger up while staring at his appalled expression. She neither moved nor spoke as she just stared and studied his face. Even without touching him, he looked real. "Did I really transmigrate into my favorite novel, or am I in a coma?" she asked herself, finding no definite answer. "Either way, I'm relieved to spend another day in here." Her eyes softened as a subtle smile resurfaced on her face. The subtle change of her expression caused his already knitted brows to crease even more, making him drop his arms. "Just what is wrong with you?" he asked when he couldn't take it anymore, gazing at her cautiously. Now that he could see her up close, she was clearly someone who grew up being pampered. He could tell with one glance. So what was this young lady doing in here, with him, a delinquent whose future was as dark as the void? "I'm so glad you're still here," she said, making him freeze wide-eyed. Her soft eyes sent him a sense of warmth. Cosette patted her chest lightly as she heaved a sigh of relief, happy for a reason he couldn't understand. Thank God. Maxen snapped his tongue as he looked away. "Wipe your drool first, it's distracting." Her eyes dilated as she instantly wiped the corner of her lips in embarrassment. As she did, Maxen cast her a side-eye, surprised that she actually believed his obvious lie. He just wanted to ruin the mood she was unconsciously creating, a mood he was never used to be in. "Sorry, I'm only human." She pursed her lips after wiping the corner of her lips, Right, did you have breakfast? Let me buy you some light breakfast. Cosette clapped as she suddenly sprung up to her feet, abusing this energy she never had in her real life. She didn't even wait for him to respond, as she already picked up her bag and dashed away full of energy. He could only watch her sprint away like a bolt of lightning. What a weird girl. How can she have so much energy early in the morning? Maxen stared in the direction she had disappeared to for a long time. He wouldn't be surprised if she didn't come back. He was used to being abandoned, after all. Not that it would matter to him if she ran away or not. Actually, it's better if she doesn't come back, he muttered as he peeled his eyes away, gazing down at his hand. I'm glad you're still here. Her words suddenly hovered over his head, along with the image of her gentle smile. He shook his head to get that memory out of his head. It was because of those words, glad he was still there, that gave him these strange feelings. For a stranger to utter such careless words, he shouldn't think about it too much. It was quite an irony. To think he would hear those words from a stranger, the bitterness in his tainted heart reach his tongue. All his life, everyone kept telling him he should have just died or questioned his pathetic existence. So those words touched a part of his brain he was unaware existed until now. I hope she won't come back. In contrast to Maxen's wishes, Cosette returned with tons of paper bags she carried with both her hands. The bright smile on her face as she returned while holding up the foods she bought almost blinded the patient she was taking care of. I want to wipe that smile off of her face. His expression remained blank, watching her serve it on the over-the-bed table. Dig in, she announced excitedly, while Maxen gazed at the feast right in front of him. So much food, he didn't know when was the last time he had faced with food and side dishes, and even dessert. Or rather, he didn't have a memory of experiencing such a sumptuous meal. All he could remember was watching his uncle, with the latter's wife and son, share a good meal from a distance. I'm not hungry, he said coldly, unwilling to touch the food. What, even if you're not hungry, you should still eat. Maxen shifted his eyes to her as she stood beside the bed, planting her hands on her hips. Does your arms hurt? If so, I can feed you. For a brief moment, just for a split second, a smug smile appeared on Cosette's lips that sent a shiver down his spine. She wanted to feed him, and he felt something prickle under his skin. Are you a psychopath or what? He inquired in disbelief, staring at her thoroughly in case she would show that brief smile that gave him goosebumps. Cosette clicked her tongue as she plopped her butt down on the chair, pouting. I'm just concerned. How can you be so rude as to call me a psychopath? She crossed her arms, glaring at him. The doctor said you can be discharged today. Just take the medicines he prescribed you to and take plenty of rest. How can he send you home like that? She mumbled with a pout, displeased at the doctor's news when she went out. Can't he see you're barely alive? While she complained to herself, Maxen just glanced at her in silence. He couldn't understand what she was so upset about, but he stopped trying to understand her. For him, it was better to just go on separate ways. The sooner the better. Not that they would see each other again anyway. That's right, it's not like we're neighbors or classmates. She just happened to be around the area yesterday. Little did Maxen know this wouldn't be the last time to see her, because his devoted fangirl was even more determined than she was yesterday. Chapter 9, the mission continues. When Maxen was discharged a few hours later, the two of them argued about how he would go home. As usual, he insisted on taking a bus since he had no money for a cab, but Cosette already got him one and even paid it twice the amount he needed. And before she sent him off, she nagged him to take his medicines on time and have plenty of rest. She repeated it like a broken record to the point Maxen nearly lost his mind. Standing on the hospital's driveway, she giggled while staring at him through the window of the back passenger seat of the cab. Maxen, he is still so young, she thought. Your medicines, don't forget. She reminded him when he glanced at her. As usual, he didn't react and averted his eyes coldly. Still, she waved him goodbye. Take care, Tilda, she continued waving, watching the cab drive away. Since she didn't have enough energy to commute, Cosette contacted her driver to pick her up in the hospital. Her driver arrived minutes after Maxen left. Just when will I wake up? That question suddenly hovered over her head, making her eyes droop. To be honest, if I can choose between reality and this world, I will choose the latter in a heartbeat. Cosette was terminally ill and was just waiting for her to die. She actually wanted to, so the expenses for her treatment would stop burdening her grandparents. Grandpa and Grandma. Her eyes softened at the thought of her grandparents before she shook her head with her eyes closed. Whatever, Cosette, she slapped her cheeks to wake herself up. That's not important. What's important right now is I have more time to meet the other characters. While she cheered herself up, reminding herself of what she should do, the driver glanced at the rear mirror. What he saw was the young miss holding both her fists up, looking all determined. Usually the young miss would just sit there in silence while staring at the window, as if she was a goddess, untouchable, unreachable, and unapproachable. So for him to see Cosette, having this energy and determination, slightly baffled the driver, and yet he didn't say a single word about it. The young miss of the Blac family had the authority to fire anyone at will. He would rather pretend to be mute and deaf instead of stepping out of his bounds and offending her. Moreover, wasn't it better that the young miss was becoming a normal and lovely 16-year-old, and not a mature lady trapped in a young lady's body? When Cosette returned home, it was as if she didn't go away overnight. She was still welcomed by the servants politely, and her father was already at work. It was a freedom most youngsters would enjoy, so she happily went to wash up. Cosette had many plans even for today, since she believed this might be her last day in the world of the novel. Gosh, I can't believe I actually interacted with Maxen. She cupped her cheek, sitting on the chair in front of the vanity mirror. She was still in her robe with a towel wrapped around her hair, blushing at the memorable encounter she had with her favorite character. But as she revisited today's and yesterday's memories, a frown slowly dominated her face. Although she was over the moon to meet Maxen, the villain of the novel's story, having a glimpse of the life he had to lead left a bitter taste in her mouth. It looked so real. Even in the hospital, everyone are like real people, came out a murmur, thinking that everyone she met, be it a character in the novel or just a stranger, didn't look any different from actual humans in her world. Come on, Cosette, she slapped her cheek lightly, trying to get herself together. You can't be distracted with that. Today I will go to the academy and take a peek at Asher Quinn. As far as I know, his brother and friends who are also key characters in the novel also study there. The side of her lips stretched even broader as she thought about meeting the male lead and the side characters. If she was a bit early, she would also make a trip to the countryside to meet the female lead. Surely Cosette had her hands full. On her bucket list, she already checked the characters she met. For example, Nanny Lucia and the driver George. How she knew about them was because they were mentioned in the novel a couple of times. The driver who would grow old being the personal driver of Cosette was someone she trusted in the novel. If anything, the driver knew a lot of secrets more than Lucia or Cosette's father, but not a single word was said from the driver's lips. That was why the real Cosette was comfortable, even when the driver was around. Asher, Luke, and Matthew, Cosette uttered the names she was planning to meet today. Asher was the male lead, Luke was his little brother, and Jake was the male lead's best friend. Jake would become Asher's business partner after 10 years when the novel starts. Now that she thought about it, there were more characters she could meet in the academy. It was a school of elites, after all. And the novel The Devil's Heat circled around the socialites, their struggles in the upper echelons, and so on. So there were a lot of wealthy characters. Even the female lead will enter the upper echelon, she muttered, recalling the scene when the country bumpkin first attended a party for the elites. That's where the story will start and how Asher and Mia will meet. Cosette smiled, despite knowing she would probably wake up before she would witness that magical first meeting from happening. After some time, she readied herself to visit the academy. If she was able to meet the villain Maxen, she was hopeful she could at least glimpse at the male lead even from afar. Hee, if only I can ask for their autographs and selfie, but whatever, it's not like I can take them home. A giggle slipped past her lips as she happily skipped herself towards the walk-in closet to change, for she would stop at nothing in meeting every character she could. Chapter 10: The Heart of a Die-Hard Fan. Cosette expected it would shock everyone that she was out and about just 3 hours after she returned home. They weren't. They were used to it. Still, she informed Lucia that she would go to the academy to get something from her dorm. Cosette had a room in the academy, although she rarely used it since she preferred going home. She only stayed in the dormitory if she needed to finish something and couldn't afford to waste a second on the road. Sister Cozy is so efficient and responsible that even though she's only 16, her authority in their household is solid, she thought, walking through the wide and long driveway of the academy. She told the driver that she wanted to walk, so he only dropped her off at the gates. Her lips curled down. I underestimated how uselessly huge this academy is. I feel like before I reach the main building, it will be nighttime. Cosette grumbled, looking around at the area. In the novel, the academy was only mentioned one time, and with only one sentence. A school of elites. Who would have thought the school of elites the author was talking about was far bigger and more glamorous than anything she had seen? It actually stood to its name, and the environment it emitted just by its aesthetic. As she sauntered leisurely, she caught a glimpse of a greenhouse on the east wing of the academy. There were a few more separate buildings, such as the girls' and boys' dormitory, that looked like mansions. It was truly a place that only the richest among the rich could attend. The people's wealth in this world doesn't make sense, but then again, this is the world of the novel. It doesn't need to make sense. She nodded in agreement. Now I am a little more conflicted, she continued in dismay. Can I really meet them in such a vast and majestic place? Meeting Maxen wasn't all luck, since compared to that public high school, it was far smaller than this academy. The girls' dormitory was even bigger than the entire winter high school. But even with that fact laid on the table, a heart of a devoted fan such as herself would never give up. That was her one and only purpose at the moment, after all. A meet and greet with the characters of her favorite novel. Cosette's eyes lit up as invisible flames exuded from her back. I will meet him, just you wait, Ash. After the seemingly endless walk, Cosette asked around about the floor and which building was the juniors of the school were at. Since it was only stated in the novel that Asher and Cosette were schoolmates and he was 2 years ahead of her year, she didn't have an idea which class exactly Asher was in. Right now, Cosette was in her 2nd year of high school, meaning she still had to attend 4 years of high school. Asher, on the other hand, needed 2 more years before he graduate. The staff said this floor. Cosette took the last step up and walked through the empty corridor. As she did, she kept glancing at the classrooms she would pass by. It didn't surprise her that each classroom only had several students inside. Some only consisted of 10 students, and the max was around 20. Although it wasn't surprising since this was the world of the novel, she couldn't help but be in awe. All students she had a glimpse of all looked wealthy. I didn't see anyone who matches the male lead's description. She frowned after passing by the last room and reaching the end of the corridor. In the novel, the male lead was said to have jet black hair with eyes as dark as the void. The author said that even if he was in a large crowd, he would stand out. Apparently, the students she had seen so far from inside the classrooms all stood out. They were all good-looking. Gosh, she pinched the space between her brows, trying to think how she would find him. She deliberately didn't give away her reasons when she was asking around and avoided mentioning Asher's name at all costs, but it seemed she had no choice. Was there really no way to find his whereabouts unless she became direct and bold? Should she try a different approach? But considering that even though Cosette and Asher shared the same circle of friends and business associates in the novel, their first meeting would be a few years later. Well, it's not like this is all real. Cosette cocked her head at the sudden thought that crossed her mind. That's right. Even if I become a bit bold, it's not like I'm literally inside the novel. Cosette talked to herself for a good 5 minutes, telling herself that she could do whatever she wanted since nothing would go wrong. Even if there was, it was not like this was all real. Still, there was this lingering fear of what-ifs inside her heart. Gosh, I don't know. She stomped her feet and turned around, only for her face to crash against something sturdy. Ah. On instinct, Cosette grabbed the person's clothes to stop herself from staggering back. Fortunately, the towering student had a good foothold, so even when she grabbed him, he stood there like a wall. Gosh, am I running out of luck? She murmured, rubbing her forehead before gazing up. Dark eyes as dark as a void, and as cold as ice hovered over her. His tousled jet black hair dangled down and its tip reached across his sleek and thick brows. For a moment her world stopped and recalled all the words the author used to describe Asher. Someone who would stand out even if he was put in a large crowd. Dark eyes that seemed to suck one's soul, long pointy nose, thin red lips and cold facial features, as if he was suffering from facial paralysis. This student looked so similar to the author's description. There was no mistaking it. Deep down, even before her brain could confirm it, the heart of the die-hard fan already knew. Asher Quinn. Your hand, came out a monotone voice, but still strangely sounded so pleasant in the ear. Wow, she breathed out unconsciously. Husband of the Year. Chapter 11, Meeting the Husband of the Year. The Husband of the Year. Asher frowned as his brows furrowed, but said nothing. Instead, he assisted her until she was standing in her stature like a gentleman, while she looked at him with strange emotions in her eyes. He knew all the faces on this floor, so he was certain she was from another class. Was she another admirer of his? He narrowed his eyes. Are you all right? He queried while studying her out of habit. Nothing, she was too starstruck. Miss, he spoke once again after a minute of letting her stare. patting her knuckles because she was still gripping his uniform's placket. This time, Cosette snapped her eyes as she hurriedly released his uniform as soon as she realized her grip. She laughed awkwardly, holding her hand behind her. Sorry. Cosette stepped aside stiffly and motioned her hand. Sorry for blocking your way. Go. Go, his brow arched. His tone and expression forced her into a state of panic. Did she come off rude? I mean, she cleared her throat and felt like shrinking under his gaze. Her mouth opened and closed, but her voice wouldn't come out. Miss, this is a flaw. Yes, I'm sorry, goodbye. Asher trailed off, blinking his eyes before he raised them at the young lady dashing away like a bolt of lightning. His brows creased, tilting his head to the side. What was that about? He muttered with myriads of question marks over his head. The way Cosette was like she was fleeing from a crime scene. The students getting admitted to this academy just get weirder and weirder. Asher shook his head, while flattening the crease she created in his uniform, before resuming in his steps as if nothing happened. Cosette only stopped when reached the ground floor, catching up to her breathing while holding onto the railing. Her face flushed in red, patting her chest to calm her speeding heart. I met him, she breathed out, raising both her fists to her lips, recalling Ashen's handsome face. I even spoke to him. Kaya, she covered her lips and looked around cautiously, suppressing her joy in meeting the male lead, Asher Quinn, in person. She was on cloud 9, although she fled like a criminal. Her meeting with the villain Maxen felt like watching a heart-wrenching movie film. It tugged her heart that she felt like crying with just the thought of it. On the other hand, meeting Asher was different. It was like meeting a celebrity. Her breathing even grew ragged as she tried to calm her heart. If only she could scream right at this moment, she would have done it, since it was hard to contain the happiness welling up in her heart. Gosh, I met the husband of the year. Cosette pressed her lips into a thin line as she recalled Asher's heart-melting gestures and dialogue in the novel. In the novel, Asher was known to be an aloof person. He was the typical male lead who had it all: wealth, power, fame, and beauty. Say it, he had it. But when Asher met the female lead, his uneventful life turned upside down. Just like every cliché novel, the ever-perfect yet cold man slowly warmed up, all because of the power of love. A lot of readers admired him as he set the bar too high. He became a doting boyfriend who only had the female lead in his eyes. And to think, a reader like Cosette would be able to meet him. It was truly a dream come true, even though he was still in his teens. She could actually die without regrets now. What a simple-minded girl. I'm so happy. A relieved smile dominated her face. She would treasure that simple meeting forever. When she recovered, Cosette still wandered the academy, hoping to see some characters in the novel. But alas, she didn't meet any of them, aside from Asher. She was already happy, though. Meeting Asher was like winning the lottery. After wandering the academy, George, Cosette's personal driver, picked her up. Sitting on the back seat of the car, a bright smile was dominating her face. Even if she tried to take that smile off of her face, she couldn't. It felt like it was already cemented in her face. George could not help but glance at the young miss through the rear mirror. His brows rose in confusion, but kept his mouth shut like always. How the day passed by so fast, she muttered, leaning the side of her head as she gazed outside the window. The sky was already painted in a warm tone of tangerine, and the lights from the cars on the highway were already twinkling like stars on the land. I can't sleep yet, she told herself, smiling. I still have something to do before I wake up from this dream. And that was to eat dinner with Cosette's father. Living in this body for 2 days granted her the chance to meet the important characters in the novel. So, this dinner was the least she could do for the villainess in the story. It may not change anything in the story, but at least in her memory, she could delude herself that Cosette had a warm memory of her beloved father. The two of them just needed to communicate, that's all. So that was her plan before the day ends. When Cosette reached home, her father hadn't arrived just yet. So while waiting for him, she washed up once again and rolled around the bed while hugging the pillow to muffle her squealings. Knock, knock. Young miss, it's time for dinner. The master had already returned. Cosette gazed at the door and grinned, eyes glinting in excitement. Coming. Cosette hurriedly jumped out of the bed to stand in front of the mirror, practicing the real Cosette Blac's demeanor and expression. If she acted too excited, it would only make her father suspicious. Same with if she acted too sweet. Cosette Blac was aloof, sharp, and cunning. So she had to exert a bit of effort to be the same with a touch of the Cosette that was now inhabiting this body. Let's do it like how Sister Cozy will do it. she cheered, eyes blazing with determination. Chapter 12, Reality slowly sinking in. The ambience at the dinner table was quiet, awkward, and uncomfortable to be in. Cosette squealed internally, complaining at how come her handsome father, whom she could also fangirl over, was being too silent. She felt like making a sound would annoy him. Conrad was intimidating even without trying. When Cosette joined him at the dining table, her father, Conrad Blac, only cast her a cold glance. He only looked at her one time and then ate without a word. This was something new to her. It wasn't for Conrad or the servants on standby. Everyone except her was already used to the stiff atmosphere between the two. Cosette was too prideful and her father wasn't the affectionate type. Together, it was total silence. Their personality was what caused the two to be what they were now, distant and never talked unless it was important, just like what was described in the novel. What am I supposed to tell him? She wondered, distressed that it seemed Conrad didn't plan on striking a conversation. Sister Cozy, this is too much of an assignment. Cosette glanced at Conrad, who was eating elegantly like a real elite he was. She couldn't deny that Conrad's appearance was akin to Cosette's cold front, but much more mature. Although his unchanging expression added allure to his charm, she didn't know how to break the ice with this man. Just then, her eyes lit up as an idea flashed across her mind. Cosette cleared her throat to get her father's attention. When she knew Conrad cast her a look, she sported an indifferent look while slicing through the steak. I gained a friend yesterday, she spoke, making Conrad quirk a brow, as this was the first time in a long time his daughter spoke something trivial. It was almost as if his ever-strict daughter wanted to engage in a conversation with him. Our meeting was a little strange, but we still became good friends in the end, she added with a shrug. I see, Conrad nodded while she set her eyes back to him. That's good then. Is that all he had to say? She mentally clicked her tongue, but then remembered that Conrad was a man of few words. Not to mention, he didn't know how to talk to his daughter, as it had been a while since she spoke sweetly to him or expressed his emotions properly. Cosette pressed her lips into a thin line as a shallow breath slipped past her lips. Her plans to make Conrad and Cosette closer were harder than she thought. It wouldn't easily get fixed as if nothing happened in just one dinner. Sorry, Sister Cozy, if I can stay longer, I wanted you to get closer to your father, but her thoughts trailed off as she sighed for the umpteenth time. I think this is all I can do. She was sad, obviously. She wanted to do something for her second favorite character in this world, but pushing her luck could have a negative effect and raise suspicion. Although she had told herself multiple times that doing drastic changes wouldn't change the story since it was all a dream, a part of her told her she still needed to stay cautious. Hence, she was being careful, even though she believed she shouldn't. The dinner ended in silence, as neither of them talked again after that brief conversation. Cosette and Conrad parted without saying a single word, leaving this heaviness in her heart as she returned to her room. Lying on the bed, Cosette rested an arm on her forehead while staring at the ceiling. It's strange that this dream feels like my reality, she muttered, revisiting the events that occurred ever since she awoke in this dream. It wasn't the usual dream where it would skip at random times. There were no sudden monsters or superheroes flying out of nowhere, too. All the things that happened followed the cause and effect rule. Just like in the road earlier, a speeding car received honks from those it passed by. The happenings in the hospital, the people she interacted with until now, and so much more felt like they were real people with their own hearts and a story to tell. Really, what a strange dream, she repeated under her breath, recalling how tender and tasty the dinner she had tonight was. Was that even normal? Cosette was unsure, but what she still believed until now was everything would come to an end once she closed her eyes. Her eyes weakly opened and closed, feeling sleepy with a full stomach. Her last thought was, once she opened her eyes again, she would be back to her reality. It was a bittersweet experience, but she was already happy to meet the villain, the villainess, the male lead, and some minor characters. It was really a dream come true, she whispered before succumbing to the darkness. The next morning, the light knock from the door woke her up, followed by Lucia's gentle voice from outside the door. "Young miss, are you awake now?" asked Lucia, who was standing outside the room of the young mistress of the house. "Ah, what a wonderful dream. I can still hear Lucia's voice," Cosette thought as the knocking stopped, and so was Lucia's voice. Cosette stretched, blinking wearily while her brain buffered. When the same ceiling came clear, her eyes slowly dilated as Cosette suddenly sit upright. She looked around, sporting an aghast expression, as this was still Cosette's room in the novel. For a moment, her mind malfunctioned as myriads of questions polluted her mind like a virus. "No," she gasped in horror, flinging her legs out of the bed to rush towards the vanity mirror. As soon as she saw the beautiful young lady's reflection, she touched her face in a hurry. "No way," came out a disbelief voice as she staggered back. Her first 2 days were like a blessing to her, as she had only thought of taking the opportunity to meet the characters in the novel. Her heart for the past 2 days was filled with nothing but joy and excitement. But on this third day, her heart was slowly being filled with nothing but dread. Impossible, she thought. Did she truly transmigrate in her favorite novel as the villainess? Chapter 13, a quick review of the original storyline. Filled with anxiety, uncertainty, and doubt, the third time Cosette awoke in this world warranted her to stay inside her room all day. She barely even touched the food Lucia brought her, as she tried to sleep for as long as she could during the third day. But Cosette still woke up inside this same room, and inside the body of Cosette Blac on the fourth day. At that point, she was still in denial, but not as strong as the third day. Then another day came, and then another one. Now, on the 6th day, Cosette had finally accepted that she had transmigrated into a world of a novel. Lucia had been increasingly worried about her, but she would barely voice it out as Cosette gave her a cold shoulder. "Let's see," Cosette hummed, sitting on the chair in front of her study table with a pen in her hand and a notebook. "If I really transmigrated here, I should start pennying down what this world is, the characters, and everything I can recall, so I won't forget them." She nodded in determination, writing down the plot of the novel, The Devil's Den. In the original novel, it would start around 10 years from now. At the beginning of the story, Mia, the protagonist, a brave girl full of dreams from the countryside, went to a big city to pursue an acting career. It wasn't easy for a girl who didn't have connections like her. Still, with hard work to hone her craft and perseverance to pursue what she loved, her hard work slowly bore fruit. Mia started getting small roles and did her best each time. No matter how small her role was, she would leave her mark. With a beautiful face that looked so endearing and easy to remember, combined with her skill in acting, dancing, and singing, Mia slowly gained recognition and eventually reached success. As a successful actress, Mia's social circle was full of elites in the upper echelon, so it was no surprise for her to attend a high-class gathering. One of them was a fateful night where her life took a magical turn. It was a yacht party she attended just to unwind and relax, to forget her terrible ex-boyfriend. As she tried to keep a low profile and hid from the crowd whilst drinking, she bumped into a handsome man. It was Asher Quinn. Asher simply went to the upper deck to make a phone call, but he didn't know he would meet an intoxicated lady, blaming him dramatically just because he shared the same gender as her previous lover. It put him in a tight spot since Mia was weeping while clinging to the railings. He planned to leave her, but when a strong wave hit the yacht, Mia was nearly thrown out of the yacht. So in the end, he had no choice but to stay with her and listen to her whims. When he got her to calm down, they both sat down on the deck. Mia kept spewing her heartaches and woe, and somehow, with her personality, she managed to make Asher talk about himself. There, she found out that Asher was being pressured to marry as he was nearing his 30s. Carefree as she was, Mia volunteered to be his lover, not a wife, just to stop his elders from pressuring him to marry. Of course, Asher just laughed it off, blaming the alcohol in her system. Still, they continued talking about anything random, as if they had already known each other for a long time, even though it was their first meeting. Time passed without them realizing it, and Mia eventually passed out. Gentleman as he was, Asher carried her and found her a room to rest. However, just as he laid her down, she clung to him and embraced him like a pillow. Nothing happened between them, but that was the highlight of the beginning of the story. Because the next day, Mia brought up their conversation the night before regarding the deal of being his secret lover. All she wanted in return was to make her stupid ex-boyfriend know he wasn't a loss to her. It was an abrupt and ridiculous deal where they simply wanted to meet their goal. However, what they didn't know was that it was the start of a wonderful romance. The story started off as cliché and light, full of fluff, Cosette muttered while tapping the end of the pen against the notebook, recalling the first volume of the novel. But then Volume 2 took a drastic turn. Chapter 14, a quick review of the original storyline II. But then Volume 2 took a drastic turn. Her expression turned grim because, in Volume 2, new characters were introduced. Asher and Mia in Volume 2 had already developed feelings for each other, but they hadn't confessed yet. In Volume 2, Maxen appeared and Sister Cozy. A sigh slipped past her lips. The latter's appearance in the novel and her interest in the male lead would pale in comparison to Maxen's obsession. Maxen, the villain. Cosette let out another deep sigh as she started writing down the crimes and the unforgivable sins he would do in the novel. Rape, murder, illegal dealings, and his connections in the underground world. She cringed as she recalled how Maxen became a terrifying monster in the novel. Maxen wasn't the type who would do love. He took pleasure in other people's agony, and he wouldn't even bat an eye if someone died right in front of him. He was sick in the head, to say the least. When Maxen met Mia, he didn't love her, nor did he like her. If anything, what caught his eyes was Mia's light. The female lead was a virtuous lady whose smile could capture anyone's heart. It would make one assume that Mia only led a good life. And that was what annoyed Maxen. She looked like the type of person he loathed the most, someone who seemed to have it all and could shine so brightly. He wanted to kill that light and take away that smile on her face. Thus, as a psychopath and cold-blooded as he was, Maxen entrapped Mia in a party and ordered men to take advantage of her. Yes, Maxen was a despicable villain that one would hate from the get-go. Volume 2 revolved around Mia's struggle with Maxen and how her relationship with Asher ended. Maxen was a dangerous man who could stand on equal ground as Asher, so she didn't tell him, and she was afraid that Asher would see the video of her being used by different men. She went through a very dark path in the first half of Volume 2, before Maxen slowly softened up to her. Cosette nodded, as the smart Mia didn't let Maxen kill her spirit. Instead, Mia became the person Maxen wanted her to be. She pretended to like him and was obedient. She endured sleeping with the man she hated and smiled at him, as if he didn't make her go through all those traumatic things. She did all that to protect the family who raised her in the countryside. But Maxen knew all that. He was aware that she was simply pretending, that no matter how much he would change for her, Mia's heart would never be his. And yet, he was already willing to believe this superficial and brittle, yet beautiful relationship they had. Maxen was already content with their relationship, despite knowing she hated him to the core. In the end, Asher didn't give up on her and secretly met Mia. The male lead secured her family to where Maxen wouldn't be able to find or reach them. And that's how Mia plotted her revenge and escape plan from Maxen's clutches. To make the story short, Mia and Asher successfully brought down Maxen's company and revealed their organization. In the action-packed ending, Maxen finally met his end in a car accident while he was on the run. That's how the villain died, and Asher still accepted Mia, even though she is already tainted. Cosette frowned, as the ending was satisfactory since Maxen deserved his ending if they only looked at his present deeds in the novel. However, there was a reason Maxen became a monster. Unlike Mia and Asher, Maxen never had anyone to save him. He didn't have salvation while growing up. Since birth, the world was just nothing but cruel to him, she added with the same dejected tone. But Maxen, when he slowly warmed up to Mia, even though he knew their relationship wasn't real, he still showed his humane side of him. He still chose to trust her, even though he knew she would betray him. For Cosette, if Asher lived the life Maxen led, he would also turn out to be a monster. Actually, not just her, but everyone who took their time in understanding the villain would understand him, not tolerate, but understand him. Because, in reality, everyone can become a monster just like him. In the same situation, even I can become a monster. Mia also discovered that she was capable of killing, considering everything that happened to her in the hands of the villain. She only didn't do so because Asher stopped her, but if he didn't, Maxen would have died in Mia's hands instead of in a car accident. Cosette's frown remained as she recalled the story she was only reading, but now she was a part of it. 10 years, she whispered, mustering her courage as her eyes flickered in determination. We're still 10 years before the main story begins. I have plenty of time. In the novel, Maxen didn't have anything to do with any of the characters before he met the female lead 10 years from now. So, even if I change his future, Asher and Mia will still meet and fall in love. I am just taking out the final boss. The story can end in the first volume. With that thought in mind, Cosette's eyes burned with determination to change the fate of just one character. Little did she know, her action from this moment on wouldn't just change one person's life, but a lot more than she initially planned. And thus, the start of the mission to keep the ultimate boss of the story from walking down the same bloody path, just like in the novel. Chapter 15, Transferee. Cosette had been staying in her room for the past few days, but tonight would be different. She accepted the fact she transmigrated into the world of the novel. She had to, not like she had any other option. Therefore, she planned that her mission would commence tonight. I heard you weren't feeling well in the past days. Conrad broke the silence as his daughter finally joined him for dinner. He watched his daughter glance at him briefly, before she set her eyes back on her plate. That was Conrad's cue to stop talking. His daughter was cold and aloof. Although he was already glad that she was doing well and topping her exams, he couldn't help but worry. Cosette was still young, but she was too mature for her age. He appreciated her efforts and intentions to become someone worthy of being the next head of the family, but Cosette was wasting her youth. He couldn't directly tell her that, though. It would only upset her, and she would only think that he didn't have enough trust in her. As Conrad thought of ways how to make his daughter listen, Cosette was secretly beating herself on how to ask her father a favor. Although she already knew that Conrad would agree to any of her requests, she still wanted to wait for the perfect time. There will be no perfect time in here, she told herself, nodding mentally. There's no development from the last dinner with him to now. If I don't act now, I will surely regret it later. The original story will start in 10 years, but the last boss is slowly becoming the devil incarnate. I want to transfer school, came out a weak voice as she raised her head, revealing the determination written all over her face. Her father quirked a brow, a bit baffled at what he just heard. You want to transfer school, he repeated for clarification and saw her nod. Why, is there something wrong in the academy I must know? Cosette shook her head lightly. It's nothing like that. The past few days, I locked myself in my room to meditate and think about everything, and not because I was unwell. After mulling over it, I want to change school. Conrad was a bit taken aback by her remarks, but it wasn't really surprising for Cosette to decide on things suddenly. What was surprising was her suggestion to transfer to another school in the middle of the school year. There were myriads of questions inside his head, but he knew those types of questions were things that Cosette wouldn't like. Thus, he only considered what was important. Why, he asked in the same distant tone, what will you gain by transferring from the best academy in the country to another? Because, Cosette paused as she gazed up at him, staring at him straight in the eye. I wanted to understand what a normal 16-year-old girl is like. Her answer made his eyes dilate momentarily. Did he hear her correctly? Cosette, his daughter, who was obsessed with becoming a perfect leader, was saying she wanted to be normal. I will not gain that development in the academy since everything in there is about connections. I want to attend a school where my peers won't see me as the heiress of the BLK group. I may be sacrificing future connections and opportunities, but I don't want father to worry about this thing anymore. Conrad opened and closed his mouth, but his words were stuck in his throat. His daughter was a perfectionist, so to think she wanted to transfer school just because she wanted to understand something she considered ridiculous was shocking. But the real bomb she dropped was when she called him father, not chairman or master. I already had a school in mind, the Winter High School. It only needs father's approval. She kept it short and simple, acting like how the real Cosette would act and speak. She looked at her father without showing too much information, watching Conrad clear his throat. If that is what you want, I'll make arrangements. His eyes dilated because for a split second, his daughter smiled. It wasn't a big smile, it was even barely noticeable, but she did smile. Not the usual smile she had practiced, but a candid one. He could not help but have this lingering hope that Cosette also sincerely wanted to become a normal 16-year-old, where she shouldn't be afraid of committing mistakes. Thank you, Papa. Cosette resumed eating, grinning internally as she couldn't shrug off this happiness in her heart. It was as if she could feel her heart slowly get healed. 3 days later in Winter High School. After Maxen got discharged and returned to his small apartment room, his life returned to how it was. Dull. Although Cosette nagged him to take care of himself and take plenty of rest, there was no way he would do that. He wasn't like her, who had the leisure to rest. He needed to attend to his part-time. I shouldn't think about her, he told himself, gazing at the window from where he sat with his elbows propped against the desk in their chaotic classroom. I don't even know her name, nor does she know mine. It's not like we will meet again. He mentally nodded, erasing the memory of the young lady who was the first person to show kindness to him. For Maxen, that type of person was someone who was pampered at home and had so much compassion to give. She just pitied him. That was why she was like that. Just as he thought he would never meet that strange young lady again, he thought wrong. A second later, their homeroom teacher finally arrived, and his classmates that were standing and talking loudly took their respective seats. Maxen didn't pay attention to their homeroom teacher, nor did he find the silence that dawned on their classroom odd. He was just there for attendance, so he wouldn't get kicked out, so it didn't really matter. Okay, class, before we proceed to our lesson, I would like to introduce to you your new classmate. The teacher smiled as he cast the new transferee a look. Everyone in Section F gazed at the beautiful girl standing next to the teacher. Male students had their jaw fall open at this beauty they had never seen before, while females bore mixed expressions. Some were displeased by the appearance of the beauty, while others could not help but admire her. Meanwhile, Maxen slowly set his eyes in the front, and they instantly dilated as soon as his gaze landed on that familiar face. "Hello, my name is Cosette Blac. I hope we get along well." Cosette flashed an amiable smile as she tilted her head down politely. "What the?" Maxen felt a chill down his spine when he caught her gaze that beamed evilly for a split second.